You know, it doesn't matter if you bought a drone today or if you've been flying one for years. Drone photography is not easy. It's a tough thing to master. But I've been flying for 2 years and I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of mistakes, tried to learn, and I think I've finally started to get this kind of methodology down that has really improved my photography with drones and pretty much in general anyways. But that's what we're here to talk about today, so we can get you taking better drone photos that you're not embarrassed of anymore. Howdy y'all, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, consider subscribing and clicking that little notification bell so you know you get notified whenever I make videos, but totally up to you. Do whatever you want. Anyways, today's video is broken up into 2 sections. One being what I do to prepare for drone shoots and what I actually do on the location. And the second part is gonna be about what I do back in Lightroom. And you don't have to have Lightroom, you just need a software that can put HDR images together and also put panoramas together. I know Lightroom's really popular, but there's other options out there, so whatever you have should work. Now real quick, before I actually explain what I do when I'm flying, I do want to kind of talk about 3 things that I do before I get to the location that I think are really helpful and can just really save a lot of time. My first good practice is scouting your location online before you go. This can be a huge time saver because you can know where to park, if you're gonna have to walk somewhere, but most importantly, you're gonna know what the landscape looks like from the sky before you even get there. And this helps you save battery life and time and headache and all that good stuff. The second good practice is making sure that you're legally allowed to fly your drone. This is a super hot topic. It's very controversial. Everybody has different opinions about it, but the black and white is pretty obvious. You can't fly above 400 feet AGL. You can't fly in national parks. There's certain locations you can't launch your drone from or land it. And you know, just know your airspace, know that you can fly there. Don't be that guy that gets caught and has to pay a super expensive fine or jail time or any of these crazy stories that are out there that people have gotten in trouble. It's not worth it. Just do a little bit of research before you get somewhere to make sure that you can actually fly the drone legally. All right, and the last good practice, I know this was probably gonna sound silly, but make sure your drone is up to date. Make sure your batteries are charged. Just make sure you're not gonna get there, get the drone out, ready to go. You're in the location, you know what you're doing, you can fly out, and then, it needs to download some geofencing stupid update, right? Just make sure you're prepared, do that little extra bit of due diligence, and it'll really help in the long run. So, enough of the boring stuff. That's not what you're here for. We want to talk about how you can actually improve your drone photography, right? So the first thing that I think is an absolute must is you have to turn on automatic exposure bracketing. I'll talk about this a little bit more once I can show you exactly what it's doing in Lightroom, but essentially it's telling the camera to take multiple exposures at the same time, and then you can blend those images together in post-processing, and it gives you a larger dynamic range. The other thing that I do that's a little bit easier to just show you than explain, but I'll try to give you the gist, and that's you kind of fly the drone in a panoramic pattern, and this allows you to then stitch the photos together in Lightroom or whatever, and it kind of gives you a higher resolution image. It can also help solve the problem of not being able to fly high enough, right? Because if you could fly higher, you could see more, but if you can't fly any higher, then you have to kind of move the drone around to kind of artificially create a larger image. So you've heard me talk long enough. Let's get the drone in the air and show you exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so I got the drone out, everything's good to go. But before I actually get the drone in the air, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure the auto exposure bracketing is already on, so I'm not having to fiddle with it while it's in the air. And another thing that I do is I actually always leave my aspect ratio in 4:3 for pictures, or 3:2 if that's what your drone is. Because if you're shooting at 16:9 ratio, it actually kills some of the pixels and it reduces your resolution. So it might look a little bit better on your phone, but once you get it back into post-processing, you're actually gonna realize you kind of lost some resolution. But anyways, those are just 2 little extra tidbits. So on my DJI, I'm gonna come into the your little settings here. I come over to the camera, and under the photo option, I come down to the AEB option. And I'm kind of overkill, so I'm gonna do 5 just so I have more to work with. And then you can hit the back button, go back here. I also leave it in auto exposure. I also shoot with an ND filter, but these are just kind of, you know, you just have to kind of decide. So let's go ahead and stop wasting battery life and get this thing in the air. All right, so I'm now at 350 feet above this giant A, and that's gonna be the subject of my photo. So with that said, I'm gonna take this one photo here. So that's what the photo would look like if it's just, you know, the one top down. But what I can do is, like I said, move the drone in kind of a panorama pattern around the A so that I get more of the road and just kind of like different, you know, different aspects that I probably wouldn't get. So let me just show you kind of what I mean. All right, well, I ran into a lot of interference, so that was a little bit more choppy and not how I expected it to go. It's really struggling. I'm bringing it down now. I'm gonna change the batteries, and now I'm gonna show you how you can actually achieve the same thing to kind of get more of a portrait style photo. And because, you know, you can't turn your drone's camera unless you have the Mavic Pro Original, I guess. But, you know, for the rest of us, you know, we don't have that. You know you can do that with the drone? Really great way to make it stop. We don't have a great place to land it. Now I landed the drone and changed the battery, so now I have to go re-turn on the AEB. It doesn't default to it. Maybe there's a way to do it, I don't know. Just make sure it's still, you know, on that, you know, and when you're doing all of this. Now, this is where turning on the grid lines can be incredibly helpful, because I've done this a few different times and I've noticed that the more sets that you try to take, the harder time Lightroom has stitching them together. Maybe if your software is better, it's, you know, whatever, that's, you know, who cares? Point is, I recommend only taking 3 sets. So one pointed at maybe like 80 degrees down, then one at 45, and then one at horizontal. And, you know, I've had a little bit more trouble getting this version to work. You might want to take a few different angles and try a few different things just in case one doesn't get merged correctly. For the sake of today, I'm only going to take the one, and if it doesn't work, well, at least you understand how the process works, and, you know, anyway, it's up to you. So I'm putting the first rule of thirds line, right, the top grid line at the bottom of the A. You might not always have a perfect thing to line it up with, you know, it's up to you. And I'm gonna take the photos. And then I'm not gonna move the drone at all. All I'm gonna do is tilt the camera up some, right? Until the A is probably about in the middle of the composition. So maybe right about there. And then I'll take my next set of 5. You can actually be moving things while it's processing those images. Then I'll go ahead and bring it up about there. And take the last set. Like I said, this is totally experimental. You're gonna have to try it. The biggest thing that you have to know about drone photography is you have to keep practicing. You have to, because it is not easy. There's so much to it, and it just takes a while to get better. But, you know, hopefully you're gonna see what I mean about using these 2 little kind of things that I do to try to really improve your photography with drones, and probably in general as well. All right, so I got those photos. I'm gonna bring it back now. You wanna see the trick again? Okay, so I hope that visual representation gave you a good idea of how this process works. But now we can take it back into the computer and I can explain in a little bit more detail, and at least you'll be able to see the results of how it all worked. I have no idea if it's gonna work, so we're gonna find out together. So let's go ahead and head back and do that. That's so much better, back in the AC. All right, for the sake of time, I've already imported everything into Lightroom. but I'm still going to show you how I actually put everything together. I'm gonna try to move through this quickly so we're not here all day. Okay, so this first image here is just a standard DNG already processed image. I didn't really edit it very well. I basically just did some basic processing and then made the contrast really extreme to try to really demonstrate here the difference, because this is the normal DNG file and this is the HDR file. You couldn't even tell that it changed, could you? But here's the thing. Let's do this and this. Let's put them in this compare mode. And you still really can't tell much of a difference, but let me zoom up into this one area up here. On this right photo, which is the HDR photo, you can see that the highlights are not quite as harsh. It's very subtle, but if you look over on the left side, you know, it's a little bit brighter. But then look at the road over here on the left side. It's very grainy and it almost looks like there's a lot of noise. And on the right side, it's very clean. Still not, you know, super high resolution, but it looks better. And so this automatic exposure bracketing isn't even necessarily just for dynamic range, but it just helps the image look cleaner overall in those kind of smaller details that you're not going to see from looking at the whole image. But it really kind of separates your photos from the ones that aren't doing it this way. And so it's just a small thing, but once again, why I think it's very important to do. Now, for the sake of being thorough, in Lightroom, the way that you would do this is this first image is actually part of the original 5 photos. So 1 through 5 here, and then you'd right click anywhere on it, come up to photo merge and hit HDR. And then it'll bring up this dialog box. And you got a few options here, but I know that I don't need any deghosting because nothing was moving in my frame. So I'm just gonna go ahead and leave that how it was. Now I already merged it, and then it turned into this image, plus I added a few edits onto it, but that's how it would be, right? Now moving along, the other part of this was moving everything, or moving the drone in kind of the panoramic fashion. So what it ends up looking like from the top is these different photos, right? So you can see that as the drone moved around, I took the photos, making sure that they were overlapping, which tells Lightroom where to stitch the photos together. And this is what it looks like. Now this particular image isn't anything, you know, revolutionary, but it demonstrates the difference. This is the one of these 4 different sets down here, right? Put these together, you would right click, come up to photo merge, hit panorama. Now, if you already have HDR images and you're wanting a panorama, you can try HDR panorama, but I've noticed that it struggles. I'd much rather do the HDRs first and then stitch them together based on panorama, and but it's up to you, just kind of experimental thing, but however you want to do it. Anyways, here's just a single photo that you would get in the normal 4:3 ratio. And then here's the difference. You get a lot more real estate. Like, look at the difference of this. So side by side, on the right is the original photo, on the left is the panorama. And you have a little bit of distortion, things don't look perfect, and once again, this isn't the most ideal example, but you can see, you just can kind of, you know, now you have a 20 megapixel image versus a 12 megapixel image, and it looks like you were much higher in the sky than you actually were. So this can allow you to achieve those looks that you would not otherwise have been able to achieve, and I think that that can really start to open up the different opportunities and different ways that you can take photos with your drone. Now the last bit here, like I said, has to do with creating your own kind of portrait style framing. So this is a little bit more simple, but it's following the same premise as before. So you take one photo looking down, one kind of straight on, and then one that's fully horizontal. And then when you stitch them together, you end up kind of having this portrait style photo that once again, you're not gonna be able to get with just taking, you know, say this single photo here. So even though this one looks bigger and everything, it's still just, you know, you get a little bit more out of this one. So it's still just something you have to experiment with, try different things, and see how it can turn out. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope you learned something from it. it's taken me 2 years to get to a point where I'm thinking about drone photography at this level. Normally it's just exciting to get the drone up in the air. And for the longest time, I've only used my drone for pretty much just video. And so now that I'm starting to dive into this aspect of it, it's super complex. You have to be a pilot first and then a photographer, and you're not used to seeing things from the sky, and you have to really change the way you think about it. But I think using that automatic exposure bracketing to help kind of make sure that your image looks crisper and just more, more highlights, more shadows, more cohesive. And then also, trying to think about moving your drone around in ways and then stitching the photos together so that you have higher resolution images and you have different perspectives than you would have otherwise been able to have. So keeping all that in mind as you keep flying and keep getting better. And yeah, that's it for this one. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share it with your friends if they think they would like it, comment if you have any questions, and until the next one, see ya.